go. All right, what I got today is a new set of chapters on Part 3, Social Relations. It's actually 5 chapters stuck into this section, or part, or whatever the book is going to call it. The first 4 here, 9, 10, 11, and 12, are going to be on the next quiz, but they're all here anyway. We find, though, that we're going to talk first about some of the worst parts of human beings. Okay, we're going to talk about, the bad stuff, prejudice and aggression. And after that, we'll start to talk about some of the more pleasant things, attraction and helping each other. We'll come back down and talk about conflict and peacemaking, which is kind of an interesting mixed bag right there. Is that good or bad? I don't know. Conflict bad, peacemaking good, I guess. All right. So today we're first going to talk about prejudice and talk about what it is and where it comes from and how it influences us. Prejudice in many ways could have fit in that last last unit, where we kept coming off and saying, oh, I have free will. No, you don't, because there's all these other forces that are pushing us and pulling us. And prejudice clearly could fit in as one of those forces that are pushing us and pulling us in ways that we're probably not even aware of. So first off, prejudice is a preconceived negative judgment. It's a judgment. It's a belief. It's an attitude. There you go. And so as all attitudes do, they has an affective component, as an emotional component, a tendency towards a certain behavior, as well as a way of thinking, a cognitive component. So a prejudiced person might dislike those different, behave in a discriminatory manner, and believe that they are ignorant and dangerous. But anyway, prejudice is really ultimately a judgment. It's really the attitude. A stereotype is a belief in, that members of a certain group are a certain way. And we've already talked about stereotypes. Some common ones are things like British people are stuffy. American people are outgoing. By that I think I mean loud. Professors are absent-minded. Oh, you should see this one. We find that stereotypes might be true, stereotypes might be untrue, right? Just because it's a stereotype doesn't mean it's true or untrue. If you can recall that graph we had at one point, I don't even remember what chapter it was in, but we had that graph and we were like, group A, and we saw the normal distribution, and we said the center is the group average, and then it's all, so remember we were like, group A is smaller than group B, and so it's a stereotype. Remember the stereotype we talked about? I know, shoot me, sue me. The stereotype we laid out was Asian people were short. Remember that? Don't tell anybody. And remember, that stereotype was true in the sense, at least on that graph. I haven't looked at the figures. You look it up and tell me. But on that graph, remember you showed that Group A was to the left of Group B, so the stereotype has a basis in truth, that the average of the groups are in fact different. Yet at the same time, you saw how much overlap there was in those graphs. So the stereotype is true and untrue at the same time, right? There are thousands of individual cases that deviate from the stereotype, but that does not take away from the fact that the stereotype has a merit and a basis in truth. Okay? So be careful with stereotypes. They do it's well. How about this? We were talking about at one other point, being able to predict the average of 100 observations, but not being able to do a very good job of predicting any one at any particular moment. Same kind of thinking here. Discrimination really is starting to get into the actual physical behavior. Up till now it was attitudes. Now it's really the actual behaviors. And so discrimination is unjustified negative behavior towards a group and its members, and we could talk, very briefly, racism, sexism, ethnocentrism. I'm sure there'd be other isms if we thought about it. And the very definitions are, at least according to our text here, exactly the same. When you go from racism to sexism, it just substitute race with gender. All right. But anyway, ethnocentrism is interesting. The prejudicial attitudes and discriminatory behavior towards people of a particular culture or group. That is to say, to believe that your culture is the best. This isn't the cultural psych class. Trust me, I would go off and off and off about now. But I'm just going to leave it at that. All right. Well, prejudice is very interesting because, to get us going on this a little bit, our attitudes run at 2 levels. Okay. At one level, it's explicit and conscious, and at one level, it's implicit and unconscious. We can have different explicit and implicit attitudes towards the same object. Often we find that we retain a childhood fear of something, and we might not even know why we're afraid of it or something. Okay? Well, we find explicit attitudes. Let's say we're talking about racism now. Explicit attitudes change as a function of education. They change quite rapidly with time, but implicit attitudes tend not to change that well. There's a good picture. I think I want to talk about, well, I'm going to quick do this, but white Americans felt that 44% of their peers are high in prejudice, but only 14% felt that they, in fact, were high in prejudice. What a surprise. Here's a graph. Would you vote for a black candidate? Yes versus no. And this is very interesting. This is a measure of explicit racism, because I'm explicitly asking you this question and requiring a public response. I mean, assuming this is a public response. If it's written privately on a questionnaire, that's a totally different question. But what we find, in fact, in the last election, there was a lot of people that were worried when President Obama, okay, the last election, I've dated my lecture. No, in the 2008 elections, when Barack Obama was polling very, very well, there was a lot of people that were a little bit concerned, and they were saying, okay, people say that they'll vote for Barack Obama, because that's an explicit attitude. But when it comes time to pulling that lever in the voting booth where nobody can see them, what are they going to do? And there was some concern that perhaps that the president's race was actually going to affect the outcome, even though people said it wouldn't. Okay? In the end, did it? I don't know. Maybe Obama would have won by a landslide or something. I don't know. Okay? But anyway, blatant prejudice is going away. Blatant levels of prejudice. Here's a question that if it was asked in the 1950s, people would be perfectly okay with the question. Some would say yes and some would say no, but the question would be kind of perfectly normal for them in the 50s. But for us, I asked this question. There should be separate sections for Negroes on streetcars and buses. And you're hearing the question, you're like, what the hell are you even asking me? Because the very question itself sounds silly in 2000 and, well, I don't want to date my lectures, in today's day and age. Okay? But when it comes to subtle prejudice, it's not disappearing. It is this blatant prejudice which tends to disappear with education. And our population as a whole is getting more and more educated. Blatant prejudice disappears. Subtle prejudice doesn't. Subtle prejudice comes in many forms. Here's a very interesting one. 5,000 resumes sent out in response to 1,300 employment ads. And these, the resumes had names that were either white names or black names. Emily and Greg. Yeah, that's pretty white. And a couple of black names, Lakeisha and Jamal. And what they found was that for each 10 white resumes, and of course in this study what they did was they made Emily's resume exactly the same as Lakeisha's in every single way except put this different name on. And it turned out that if they had a white name, Emily or Greg, they got one call back for every 10 resumes they sent out. But if they had a black name, they got one call back for every 15 resumes. Okay? This is perhaps subtle or maybe not so subtle, but subtle prejudice anyway. Or participants were given an essay, and it was poorly written, and they were said, okay, we want you to evaluate this essay and score it. Okay? And if they believed that the author was white, they rated it poorer than if they thought the author was black. So what was happening is they had a different set of standards when they thought there was a different author. So clearly, on the surface, we say, well, treat everybody the same, but no, apparently that's not what people are doing. They're not treating everybody the same. Okay? Here's an interesting study. I wanted to figure out how to replicate this one. I tried with a student, and it ended up being a lot more work than we thought it was going to be. But imagine this little scenario here where these pictures pop up, and your job, I mean, I'm sure they have video games. I remember a video game like this way back in the 80s. And your job was to take the little gun and you shoot the bad guys. And if you shoot the little old grandma with the shopping bags, then you lose points. But if you shoot the bad guys, then you gain points. And, and so what would happen is they would pop up these pictures. And there would be either white men or black men popping up in the pictures. And these men would be holding either guns or something like a banana or a paper bag or something like that. And so the idea was if the guy's carrying a gun, boom, shoot. And if the guy's carrying a paper bag or a banana or something, you don't shoot a dude with a banana, right? And so what would happen is that the participants were faster to shoot when the black man came up, and they were more likely to make mistakes. Like if the black man was holding a banana, it was more likely, it was like, holy shit, okay? That's all of a sudden not too subtle anymore. Or here's one here in this top row. We see basically a matchup here. We see on the far right side that the dude is happy. We see on the far left side the dude is angry. And the question, there's a subtle gradation between these two. And the question is, when does this guy stop being mad? And when people are given this question and they're talking about the white guy, they're more likely to say somewhere around here, he's no longer mad, something like that, okay? But when it comes to the black man, they go further over. It's further before they're willing to say he's not angry, okay? So participants more likely to attribute anger to this face than to this face, okay? Yet they're matched up. And the last one here on subtle prejudice before I take a pause. Prejudice is interesting, but it's biologically rooted. I mean, we're going to talk about in-group preferences and things like this, but we really, really have these inborn fears. How do I say this? Those things that we were supposed to be afraid of in the past, we needed, as cave dudes, right? As cave dudes, we needed to be able to reflexively respond to it. If there's something you're supposed to be afraid of, and that thing, whatever that thing is, approaches you, and you stop and you reasonably analyze and consider the individual situation. No, you're going to get killed. But your job as a cave dude, if you want to survive, is there's something, it might be dangerous, boom. Which one? Okay, how about this? If you make an error in one direction, you're rejecting something that could be friendly. What about if you make an error in the other direction? You're dead, okay? One error is acceptable and one isn't. So we find that prejudice has some pretty deep roots in our ancestral past. I mean, this is really, here's a lot of words, you can read it. I'm sure somebody's interested in writing a paper in neuroscience, so there's a neuroscience for you. But clearly this is neurologically based. I mean, certain things in our brain just fire in response here. Well, we'll stop there and we'll come back and we'll start talking more about gender prejudice in the next section. All right? And cut.